we've got Eli Goings, Goblin Lackey 1, on the show.
Next on Eternal Durdles.
Extreme thank you to all the Dirtomaniacs that support the show. If you want to get ad-free content and extra free content, you can go to patreon.com/eternaldurdles and support us. Proceeds go to editing the show, upgrading equipment, and helping us travel to events. What it do? Hello and welcome to Eternal Durdles. I'm your host, Zac Clark, and with me this week we have a special guest, Goblin Lackey 1, Eli Goings. How are you, man?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on the show.
Hell yeah. We want it, you've been on before, not with me. You were on back when Nate and Phil were running the show in my absence one week. But for me, this is fresh. This is our first time meeting, as it were. But I wanted to get you on to talk about Goblins because the deck has gone through a lot of changes in the last year. It's gone from tier like F to tier 1 to whatever tier it is now. And you're the guy everyone goes to when talking about Goblins. So I think it's just imperative that we have you on to kind of level set the deck. Eternal Durdles is proud to be sponsored by Moxfield. Moxfield is the best Magic the Gathering deck building website on the internet. You can create, share, and find decks from Commander to Legacy and even fan-supported formats like Pre-Modern and Old School. You can see all of our decks on our Moxfield. Follow the links below to stay tuned.
Yeah, well, thank you for saying that. I guess for people who don't know me, because I did disappear for a while. I took a year-long break from Magic last year, and so I think I sort of faded from the Legacy consciousness a bit because I wasn't active. Yeah, the Zeitgeist, yeah. But I came back, and I've been kind of coming back into doing my writing again because I've really based a lot of my I stream on Twitch, but for most of my time as a streamer, I've tried to actually gear most of my efforts towards my writing, because that is sort of more of my background. Because I've kind of an academic background. I've been a teacher. University teaching assistant, and like a writing tutor is like kind of my main deal. So I've been really focusing. I normally focus very much on writing. I've been doing less of it, partially because there's not as much to talk about as there used to be.
Yeah. Hopefully that will change.
Yes. Yeah. But I've been doing that again. Like I've just been putting out a little sideboard guide kind of thing for Goblins because the other thing that stalled me out is Legacy. It's kind of ironic I'm saying that there isn't that much to talk about, but simultaneously it's true that there kept having be these kind of overhauls to Legacy format that kind of seemed like they were going to change things and they didn't change, you know what I mean? Where it'd be like I'd be stuck in a limbo. It'd be like, well, I don't want to write a sideboard guide when we know Grief is going to get banned in 3 weeks, because what's the point? And then so I don't write for those couple of weeks, and then the first time was the banning didn't happen, that we all kind of expected it to happen, and then it was like, well, now we're just gonna wait for like a month, and I was like, is there still any point in doing this? So I don't think I didn't do one then. I had some thoughts. I'd people ask me like, hey, what are you working on? Like, do you have any ideas for like an event? And I was like, yeah, here's deck list. Here's what I'm thinking. But then finally Grief gets banned, and then the meta doesn't actually change very much. Nope. But I still wanted to reorganize the deck list, and I think now that we're a little bit farther out, things have changed substantially enough that I actually like my deck list now. But I did go through a period where I didn't like any of my deck lists, and I was just like losing a ton and felt pretty lost in the format. And I just like kind of in the last couple, like say 2 weeks, have like come upon something that I'm like, okay, I like this. I like how this attacks the meta. And I guess we can start back from the sticker band. I guess is a good place to start.
Let's go back even further than that because let's talk about how you got into the deck.
Okay. So I started in 2016, I was putting the deck together. This was my junior year of college, and I I was abroad to where I am now, which is Glasgow in the UK. And there was a kind of a nascent legacy scene developing here. There's a new LGS that opened, West End Games, and there was a lot of people. There's like a surprising number of people there who had legacy decks. And so there started to be sort of like a legacy weekly. And so I started picking up the cards for it and going 2016 into 2017. And then I was just like fully in from that point. Like honestly, like I was obsessed where I would just when I got back to the US for my senior year, and like my roommate who's the guy who kind of got me back into Magic after playing as a kid. I played a lot as like a very young child. But he kind of introduced me to the competitive sphere. He was a really like avid modern player, and he was like showing me like Splinter Twin and Birthing Pod, and he showed me the Pro Tour streams, and we would watch SEGs on the weekends and that sort of thing. And so senior year, we used our college printer balances because we weren't using them for anything else. We proxied like, I don't know, like 7 legacy decks. Because it's just like, here's $60 of printer balance per semester, and it's like, we don't need to use any of this for anything else, so
might as well make it work.
That's what we did. And we tested a whole lot, and kind of over time he was kind of veering away from the game, and I was veering more and more into it. So I went to SCG Con for 2 summers in a row for the Duel for Duels. And that was like my first real big event was in Paris. I went to Bazaar Mox in Paris when I was in 2017. That was my first my first real Magic tournament period. I'd gone to some, what were they called? PPTQs.
Okay.
I did one of those for one of the Vegas GPs, but I had no interest in going. I split the finals. I was like proud of that. But other than that, like Paris was my first like real Magic event where there's like hundreds of people. Yeah. That was really exciting. But SGCon was my first like American one. Especially, it was my own first day 2 event as well, like a multi-day event. And I like scraped into day 2. And that's sort of like, that's also the start of my kind of having a internet presence outside of posting on the source, which is I was very active on the source. Was in round 1 I got paired against Tan and Grace on this is Deathrite. This is like right before Deathrite Shaman got banned, more or less. And we were playing. He was playing Grixis Delver, as everybody was, and I was playing Goblins, obviously. And I think it's the very first thing on my Twitter now. If you scroll all the way back, and it's that he took a picture because I chain whirlered him. He had a young Pyromancer, a bunch of tokens, and I chain whirlered him.
Yes.
And
that's gotta feel great.
He was like, "Hold on, I need to take a picture of this," and it was just like, I'm getting chain whirlered today in Legacy because it was right at the time where chain whirler was super popular in Standard, and it was just like completely dominating. And he just found it hilarious that he goes to play Legacy and it still happened to him. And so like that was like the very first thing when I was starting to think about streaming and kind of doing stuff outside of posting on the source or posting like occasional like Reddit, like back when the Legacy subreddit had people on it who played Legacy. I hope that's not too mean to say.
I mean, I think that a lot of this podcast has been built from the Legacy subreddit maybe like 5 or 6 years ago that was much more active. Yeah. The Legacy subreddit used to have like a sense of people on there who would post frequently because they were playing Legacy frequently.
And so from that point, I started like basically as soon as I graduated college, I had this tournament, the SGCon, and then basically from there I started streaming. And just really my angle on it was really, I started my channel because of spite. Is this thing I've truly learned about myself, is that I basically had I had this complex of every time I would see goblins on camera, it would lose. And I was frustrated by the fact that whenever this would happen, and I'd see the player's hands, I'd be like, oh, they punted. Like they messed up. And I was just like, goblins would always look so bad on camera. And I was just like, I play this deck a lot. I really like it. People just need to get good, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, sure.
And so I wanted to break the goblins coverage curse, and that's basically why I started my channel.
Fair enough. So what was the goblin that like got you into goblins? Like what card?
It's probably Pile Driver or Siege Gang Commander.
Yeah. Okay.
Because as I said, I started Magic really young. Like around when 7th edition came out, and I was like 5. And because I had the 7th edition, precons, and I had a bunch of foil Thorn Elementals I still have.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I remember the foiled. I think for reference, I was 18 when 7th edition came out. So that was a big year for me.
Yeah. So I had a lot of cards from that era, and there was a red pre-constructed deck that they sold. I don't remember what. I think it was Legions.
Might have been, yeah.
Or maybe it was 8th edition, because I remember it also had Goblin Chariot. But I distinctly remember, and I still have, I had, because I opened a good amount of packs of like Scourge and Onslaught. And when I kind of got back into Magic, I looked at my old stuff. I had a Pile Driver, and that was one of the more expensive cards that I had from that era, because Pile Driver used to be like $30.
Yeah, and then they printed it like uncommon in Dominaria Master, and now you can get them whenever you want.
It was a rare in Magic Origins, and that's what brought the price all the way down.
Yeah.
But like I remember going through my cards, like, holy shit, this card's expensive. And then it was Pile Driver. I had a War Chief, and then I had 2 very beat up Siege Gangs, and a Jump Bomb. And I think those cards kind of stuck with me. And I think that's probably why, like, when I was building my first Legacy deck, being Goblins, I was like, well, I had actually intended to build Death and Taxes. Because that had some appeal to me. And I had 2 Aether Vials. That was the other big thing.
Yeah.
That's
the other Aether Vial deck, right?
Yeah, and it was like...
That or Merfolk.
Yeah, and it was like, in 2016, I don't think anybody was playing Merfolk.
No, I had stopped.
Yeah. So I was like, okay, I'll build towards Death and Taxes, and Goblins looks cool. And they play basically the same lands. The only difference, I have to get Caverns for Goblins, which was, substantial at the time.
They're like $50 at the time. They're probably like $50 now, even.
Yeah. Well, they've reprinted a bunch. I don't know if it's gone down though.
Yeah.
But I was like, okay, well, the lands are mostly the same, and all the goblins are mostly cheap. It was like the only expensive goblins were Pile Drivers, which I already had one of, and then lackeys were like $20 at the time. Yeah. And I was like, okay, that's like doable. And I did actually build up Death and Taxes as well, but then by the time I'd gotten that far, I liked Goblins too much to pivot off of it. I'd always sort of told myself, like, oh, I'll play Goblins for like FNMs, but then if I go to an actual tournament, I'll play Death and Taxes, and it just absolutely never happened. So I think that's sort of why I got kind of sent in this direction.
Yeah. So I guess my next question is, so you've got your Goblins deck built, right? And then we get let's start talking about this year, right? One of the best years for goblins, I would say. You know, you got
Not
Sticker Goblin
unquestionable.
as like
Unquestionable.
a basically that was one of the tier 1 decks. Like sideboards had to change because Sticker Goblin existed. So how
Yes.
let's talk about Sticker Goblin.
Yeah, Sticker Goblin really blew people's minds, I think. I think the Goblin, and I think part of it is because the paper mechanic was so inscrutable to people. Like anytime anybody would come into the Goblins Discord, it'd be like, how does this card work? And then we had like elaborate PDF, graphics explaining, okay, you have your sticker sheet and you have you randomize your 10 sticker sheets and there's 3 stickers per sheet. And then then this is the percentages that add up to, what are your chances of making this much mana, this much mana, or this much mana. And here's all the really bizarre niche case rules interactions that stickers cause. And I think all that kind of rules baggage made people not expect it to become the powerhouse that it was, because the card was legal for a very long time before it was popular. It just wasn't on Magic Online. So there was like, you already, your group of people who are going to interact with the card are existing Legacy Goblins players, and that's it.
People who really wanted show and tell to be good.
Yeah, it's just like existing Legacy Goblins players, and then it's even just a portion of those people who are actually willing to, go through the rigmarole of figuring out how this card works and then testing it. I was high on the card. I was like, this card's definitely really good, but I didn't have any way to kind of test my theory until it came to Magic Online. It did have some like kind of local level success for some people who are playing it, but I think the breakout point was Eternal Weekend. It didn't make top 8, but it had an insane conversion rate, and I think it was top 16 or top 32. There were like 8 Goblins players that just like crushed it, and they were like, okay, this is like a real deck that people are not respecting right now. And you're right, the sideboards had to completely change. Like there had to be so many more, like people had to put like snuff outs and
Blue Blast and Hydro Blast and stuff, so that you could because at the time, like the way that it worked is if you killed the Sticker Goblin either on the stack or once it hit the board and it wasn't there when the ability resolved, they didn't get any mana. So if you could find ways to kill it, that was the thing to do.
Yeah, you needed very specific timed instant speed interaction. So yeah, the deck sort of took off, and it evolved quite a lot, because once as is natural, once a deck becomes more popular and you get more eyes on it, it's going to iterate much more quickly than if you just got like a small community that's kind of generating all of its ideas itself.
My local was lousy with Goblins for a while. Like there were like 4 people playing it at like a 16-person event at one point.
Yeah, and it was just so strong because it was extremely good at bulldozing decks that were not prepared for it.
Yeah.
People be
like in budget, like not a super expensive deck. Like what's the most expensive cards? Like Muxus, right? Like,
well, I mean,
or
the deck
Caverns, right?
It played 4 City of Traders. That's really expensive.
There you go. Yeah. Fair enough. So City of Traders, but like if you compare that to, Dual Lands, like still in budget,
Yeah. By Legacy standards.
Yeah.
And it is, other than City of Traders, I don't think there were any reserve list cards in the deck. It became really popular just from sheer power level. I don't think a lot of people didn't like it because I do think it was somewhat unfairly maligned for being super high variance when it's not actually that high variance, where people would get really, I experienced this a lot in Moto, where people get really mad if you like rolled the 6 the 6 mana. And like sometimes it would be really stupid, where it'd be like, okay, Ancient Tomb, Mox, Sticker, I rolled a 6, I'll just cast this Muxus in my hand, right? Yeah. And then it's just like, you're dead on turn 1. And I get why that could be obviously really frustrating. I don't like dying on turn 1.
No, who does?
But I think the reality of it is that most of the time, like if you rolled a 4 or 5, it was also just very good. So the deck, as the deck evolved, it became, this is something that I disliked a lot. There was a divide that slowly became out of my favor because I was on one side of the divide where people basically made the deck less goblin-y, where they would cut a lot of the more synergistic cards for more kind of just haymakers, where basically the divide was over playing ringleader versus the one ring.
I got it. Yeah.
And then also cutting some of them more, like playing fewer matrons. And towards the end, this is actually where I kind of flipped over it, where they would cut Muxus, and I was like, okay, this is smart. Where people would, the thing I hated is that people would play the deck with like 4/1 rings, and then also still 4 Muxuses, and then to also play like chalices in the main. And I thought that this was just like sort of statistically silly, where the Muxus flips were so bad in terms of like, goblin count.
Yeah, because you need the goblin count to be up there to play. Yeah, of course.
And the argument was like, well, it doesn't actually matter how many goblins you flip with Muxus. It's just like, do you hit your second Sticker Goblin and a Battlecry Goblin? Like, that's all you need to win the game.
Yeah.
And like that is somewhat true, but my argument was basically that you sort of depower the rest of the deck in all of its sort of auxiliary effects, where like, if you're playing fewer, like Ringleader is a lot better with Broadside Bombardiers than the One Ring, because if you go Broadside into Ringleader, you attack for 4, throw for 6, like draw 2-3 cards. Yeah. That's like a ton of damage in a very short time frame, and you get your cards immediately, where the One Ring would be like, well, you don't want to throw your One Ring the turn you play it. And the deck also tended to play more like fast mana, because you would play like people played Lotus Petals as well as Spirit Guides and Chromoxes, so the deck had more air in it. And so I don't want to get into the super specifics there, but just point being, that was like the divide of like, do you build the deck that it is more kind of hinged on the specific power points of specific cards and lean on stuff like the One Ring, which can totally dominate a game, totally. And I also think people who aren't used to goblins get tilted by Ringleader really easily.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I think is wild about the Sticker Goblin thing is like, you took a deck like Goblins that was, that lived in the same realm as Death and Taxes or Merfolk, and played the like Aether Vial plan, and then you just gave it a show and tell, basically, like a Sticker Goblin,
Seething
right?
Song.
Seething Song, exactly. Like, and the entire deck shifted from like this weenie strategy kind of like control-y aggro value plan into, this is a combo deck. This is a completely different.
Straight up,
this is now a combo
straight
deck.
up combo deck.
Yeah.
You kill people on turn 1 very, like, not, it wasn't that rare to at least have set up lethal on turn 1, and then turn 2 kills were like pretty common.
Yeah.
Now, during a lot of this time, I was playing Vile Goblin still, because I actually found that there was kind of fluctuations, but I really liked how Sticker Goblin played with Vile, and I disliked how much Turbo Muxus would like walk face first into Force of Will, because it was very hard to sequence. You had to be able to. You basically needed 2 caverns in order to do something with Sticker Goblin uncounterable.
Yeah.
Or you needed to be like, have like such an excess of mana where you can go like Sticker Goblin off cavern, and then like Sticker Goblin, they may or may not force it. Battle Cry with like 6 floating, and they're like, well, I have to force this, and then you cast like your follow up.
Yeah.
And so I didn't like how hard it was, like in the tempo matchups. You just get bodied by Force.
Yeah, like one daze can get you. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was still really happy with the Vile deck, because it was like a turn slower than the Turbo deck, but it was better at playing through interaction, because like Lackey would tank bolts that would hit your stickers.
Yep.
And then Vile meant that you only needed 1 cavern. You would just kind of like, you play the value game until turn 4, and you get your Vile to 3, and then Vile and Sticker Goblin cavern go off.
Yeah.
And so it had a really consistent game plan through a lot of the interaction, and then you also had a little bit. I found you had a little bit of a heads up in the mirror, because sort of a normal thing in Magic, I feel like, is like the slightly bigger or the slightly like mid-rangier, more interactive version of the deck is better in the pseudo mirror.
Yeah.
And so like, you did get you would get sometimes bulldozed by turn one sticker, but in the era where we're all playing like 4 pyrokinesis, that was not that reliable. Because basically now it's a red deck mirror where both decks have Force of Will, but it's also way better than Force of Will.
Yeah, in that particular scenario, it's much better. Yeah.
So I had like a ridiculous win rate during the sticker era. Like my constructed rating on Moto was over 1900 for a little while. And I kind of bounced back and forth between playing Vile and Turbo, and I wanted to be informed about how both decks should be played. Now there was a turn when Doorkeeper Thrall started being played really quite a lot in people's sideboards.
It was quite good. Yeah.
Vile started to feel worse
good.
because the deck is more based around ETBs than Turbo was. Because Turbo would get to ignore Thrall some amount of the time because you just go turn 1 Rabble Master, turn 2 Broadside, kill you.
Yeah.
Battlecry would do the same thing. Whereas Thrall also hitting stuff like Mogwai Marshal, Munitions Expert, Sling Gang Lieutenant, and then also just the fact that the deck was a little bit slower meant there was more time for the Thrall to get into play.
And like, the legacy power level thing to do in your deck was enter the battlefield effects. So like Thrall just like being like, now you're a standard deck, is tough, like.
Yeah. And you had to play like weird cards to get around it. Like we were playing like Twin Shot Sniper was really nice as do you know Twin Shot Sniper?
No.
So it's 3 in a red for a 2/3 reach, ETB, deal 2 to any target. But then it has a channel ability, which is
I was like,
and you could channel it for 1 in a red for shock. But basically, what was nice about it is that it's a completely uncounterable shock.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And then like sometimes you'd flip into play. Like it was kind of nice out of reach. Like you filed in and like block a Murktide or a Merilage. Like that definitely came up, but it was mostly there as like your hate bear has to die and there's nothing you can do about it.
I need this 2 toughness creature to die. Yeah. So Sticker Goblin gets banned, and now what does the deck look like at the current juncture?
Okay, so after Sticker got banned, it came right at the time where I think a big card for the deck came out, which was Boggart Trawler. Boggart Trawler from MH3 is one of the MDFC cards. So the front half is a 2 and a black for a 3/1 ETB, exile all target player's graveyard. And then the backside is a black land that it's a swamp that bolts you. It's not a very good land. But this opened up deck building quite a bit for the deck because Goblins has always been sort of restricted in terms of how much flexibility it has with non-Goblins it can play because of the requirements of Ringleader. And the requirements of Ringleader are quite steep. You basically, my feeling with it, and there's it's funny because it's both math and just like sort of vibes, where like you can look at the math and be like, okay, this many Goblins gives you this sort of bell curve of how many cards you're likely to draw off a Ringleader based on Goblins in your deck. But it is totally a judgment call of like, what's the tolerance of like the amount of variance you want on your Ringleaders. But my just sort of gut feeling after playing the deck for so many years is like, I really want 33 Goblins, 33 hits in the deck. Not 33 Goblins total, so 32. It's again, this is sort of fake math because in game you have some cards, both non-Goblins and Goblins take an hijack, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I wanted 33 Goblins game 1, and then when I'm sideboarding, if it's a matchup that cares about Ringleader, I didn't want to go below 27. That was sort of my rule of thumb. And this meant that it was very difficult to fit non-Goblins other than Aether Vial into your main deck. And this sort of restricts quite a lot of what you can do in terms of interaction. Boggart Trawler is a creature, as far as Ringleader is concerned, or Matron is concerned, and Muxus is concerned, but it's also a land. And something that Goblins has wanted to do for like 20 years is be able to Matron for a land drop. Like that's genuinely so nice. because the deck
That
is
makes
the deck
sense.
is very mana hungry. And then it's also something the deck has never had access to, which is main deck graveyard hate. Like how many years have Goblins players died? And it's a little frustrating because like a lot of the things that Bog Controller is really good against are currently pushed out of the meta because of other cards. So like when Bog Controller got spoiled, I was like, oh, I'm never gonna lose to an Uro ever again.
Yeah, turns out.
Turns out
you were right though. You were right.
yeah, yeah. But it still comes up quite a lot where like Nethergoyf is quite played right now, and it's just like, okay, it's an 0-1.
Yeah.
Shrinking DRCs comes up. It is nice that in sort of the mid games against all these reanimator decks that the games do go reasonably longer. If you get your Vial on 3, you get to blow out, reanimate just off the Vial on 3. So that kind of stuff does matter. But the land thing is really what opened up the deck building. So I wanted to fit more interaction in the deck because Legacy right now is weirdly dominated by trading 1-for-1 with creatures.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, especially because like Psychic Frog is the poster child for that, right? Like,
yeah,
that's why it's good, because if it does connect, you're in trouble because it has you're trading 2-for-1 at that point, right?
Exactly. So there's a lot of pressure to interact at very early, and on a 1-for-1 basis. And it's not just Psychic Frog, right? It's also Painter is very popular.
Yeah.
And it's like there's the difference between Painter, where they cast it and then you kill it, versus they cast it and then they untap with it and now they have Blast Up. There's also the Nadu decks are a big thing, where if you don't kill the Nomads, you die.
Yeah.
Or they're playing Mana Dork in turn 1 that you really need to kill as a top turn 2 Nadu, because if you wait and you don't kill the Mana Dork on turn 1, then now the Nadu's in play. And if you kill the Mana Dork, they get a card, and if you kill the Nadu, they get a card. And then there's Second Frog, there's Tamiyo, which will flip into a Planeswalker, then you can't kill with creature removal anymore. There's Eldrazi with Fleshraker. Like, that thing has to die immediately.
That's gotta die, yeah.
So I was finding, first I was doing main deck Furies, because they are really effective with Bombardiers, right? It's just like, okay, kill your things, throw this at your face for 7, you're dead next turn.
Yeah.
But Fury isn't that. Fury's not good against Psychic Frog, really. And you don't really want to Fury. At first I was like, oh, this card's gonna be so good against the Nadu decks, but the reality is that actually it's not, because you have to kill the Mana Dork on turn 1, so you kind of have to 2-for-1 yourself. And if you let it go, like there's sort of like a high upside play where it's like they actually have to green sun for the Nadu, so they go like, okay, halfling into play another halfling kind of thing. But then you're taking a huge risk.
Yeah, and if they have that in play, like it's been a second since I read Nadu, but I'm pretty sure if you target 4 things, they're drawing 4 cards.
Yes.
That's not good. That's not what you want to do.
Yeah. So I've most recently pivoted to main deck Fatal Pushes, because I was like, everybody in the format is playing Fatal Push. My deck now has more black sources than it ever has, because I have a tutorable black source. I can play 22 lands, because I was playing for 24, so I still have effectively 24 lands. And my Goblin count is only 1 less than I would normally want it to be.
Quick aside and a quick question. Total number of cards in main deck. You Goblin players, man.
It's currently 61.
Oh, God damn it.
Yeah, I went to 60 for a while, and then I was like, I really want this third Fatal Push.
You Goblin players with your 61 card decks.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
That is definitely my fault. That's like the one thing I can pretty concretely take credit for, is making Goblins a 61 card deck.
Oh my God.
And it was just like, it is the sort of ringleader thing, and then it's also just like wanting the deck to the sideboard maps strangely, and this is partially me doing sideboard guides for people, is like, I found that with 60 card lists, most of the time it wouldn't map out right, especially for fair blue matchups. So I do concede the deck the deck is like worse against combo decks where like you really need your opening Kate and your opening hand. Obviously that's just going to get flat worse when you have 61 cards, but against decks where you need like a wider selection of tools, the small inconsistency of going one card larger in the library, I find, is outweighed by Goblins. Goblins sees a lot of cards per game because of Matron and Ringleader. And so having access to all the tools that are in there, like I've actually got more one-ofs in the deck right now than I normally like. And I think it is actually kind of fun to talk about them. So I got these 3 fatal pushes they're lowering the curve. The deck, now this comes at a cost where colorless lands are now really strained. So, back in the day, Goblins was a 4-port, 4 wasteland deck. Port has kind of faded away because we have to cast our spells earlier and the color requirements are stricter. Even though I've cut almost every double red card in the deck. So you can function off of Mountain Swamp pretty easily. Okay. But I've got 2 Ancient Tombs, and I actually my thing I've done most recently is I wanted to fit the second Ancient Tomb in the deck because it's been so strong. I cut a Wasteland. Because other than, it's like Eldrazi and Painter, you do want all 4 Wastelands for kind of obvious reasons. But Ancient Tomb is also really good in both those matchups because turn 2 Bombardiers is really good against both of them.
Yeah.
And I couldn't cut a colorless source, or I couldn't cut a colored source because I'm kind of running off a bare minimum in terms of red sources. So I got 16. And I didn't want to cut any black sources because all these fatal pushes and munitions experts, Bog Trawler, Slinging. There are quite a lot of black cards now. And I wanted basic swamp. I wanted, because like you need to have basic swamp against the reanimator decks because you have to be able to push through wasteland. And so I've actually gotten the mana base where I really like it, even though having only 3 wastelands is kind of weird and uncomfortable. But I found the big shift was that realizing that against the blue-black decks, I basically never ever want to wasteland them. It never works.
That's fair.
As soon as they have 1 mana, they stop missing their land drops because they just cycle control. Yeah. Or their curve just stops at 2, so like they just it's very easy for them to have like a 1-lander. You wasteland them, they're like, I don't have any land, and then they draw 1 land, and then as soon as they draw that 1 land, they're fine.
This was my biggest takeaway switching from, I was playing like a 5-color Beanstalk deck over to blue-black Reanimator. Is like you just have so much resiliency against Wasteland and against like Blood Moon, all those, anything that affects non-basic lands, right? Is that in that, my biggest concern with the 5-color deck was like, yeah, you have like 2 basics in the deck, but like you're kind of stuck. You can't play more than that, and you're a 3 or 4, 5-color deck sometimes. And so, yeah, it was one of the first things I kind of realized is like how good Reanimator is at just like not caring about what you're doing with against their land and their mana base.
Yeah, the only mana base concern the deck has is like occasionally, like the fact that if you lead on basic island, you can't
want
go
2 black to do your Entomb Reanimate.
Exactly. So you can get sort of delayed by a wasteland sometimes. But in terms of a long-term game plan, it's really hard to manage deny out blue black. Yeah. So that's kind of what led me to cut a wasteland ultimately. And then the other like big things about the deck currently that I've really enjoyed and they've kind of overperformed because just like a month ago or maybe 3 weeks ago, I was in like really horrible losing streak because I just didn't know how I want to approach the deck. And I had sort of bad mental game. I was playing quite poorly. I was getting quite frustrated. And I took a week or so, a week and a half off, just like to kind of clear my head. And I came back to it, and I've been actually really happy with the changes that I've made where it's not just the fatal pushes, which have helps basically across all matchups. They're good in every matchup because combo doesn't exist. Yeah. And all the combo decks, here's the thing, it's not only that combo doesn't exist outside of Reanimator, and fatal push is good against Reanimator because of Tameo and Frog, and they side into Barragoyfs and all that stuff. It's also like the decks we think of as actual combo decks, like Doomsday, is also Tamiyo Frog decks. So Fatal Push is good against them too. And all the other, like, it's a lot of creature combo decks. It's a lot of Painter, it's Cradle Control, it's Nadu. Like, it's so nice. This is actually my favorite thing about Fatal Push is that it lets me kill Nomads on core with another creature in play. It is so hard to kill Nomads with damage-based removal.
Yeah.
It's just like every damage-based removal spell, they're just like bad edicts.
That guy instead. Yeah.
Yeah. It's so frustrating.
Yeah.
So Push just like, no, it's dead. Get it out of here. That's been really nice. And it's obviously like the metagame is just such that the blue-black decks and I think Eldrazi and Painter combined push out so many combo decks because it's the combination of Vexing Bauble, Red Blasts, Consigned to Memory, and then Thoughtseize, Forcible Days. Like, it's a lot of interaction. The format can get really grindy very fast right now, and I think the combo decks that aren't hybridizing. The combo decks, instead of trying to go fast, are trying to hybridize into mid-range decks.
Yeah.
And so there's very little cost to playing all this spot removal in my main deck, because everybody's just playing creatures, including the Dark Ritual decks. But the thing that has surprised me the most is that I've got two 1-ups in my deck that look completely antiquated by legacy standards, but they have been overperforming beyond way beyond expectations. And this is Goblin Churgeon and Siegekin Commander.
Okay. Goblin Surgeon from
Fallen Empires.
Fallen Empires?
Yes.
Is that like a coin flip card?
No. So it's 1 mana for a 0/2, which is significant in that it does not die to Bowmasters.
Yeah.
And then it is sack a goblin, regenerate target creature.
Ah, yes, there we go.
So,
also, some of the best art ever. Like, there's I think there's 4 arts, and all of them are great.
Yeah, they're great. Yeah. They're one of them is Phil Foglio.
This is one of. So which one are you using?
I think.
Is it the one that's like the Llanowar elf, like stitched to a tiger one?
That's what it's a Llanowar elf's head like getting stitched to like a torso. Yeah, I don't have that one on. I don't have that one on Moto. I've kind of the boring one on Moto, but in paper, that's the one I use.
Yeah, that's the best one.
Yeah, it is. So I've looked at this card in the past. Specifically, I used it when Dreadful Darkness was legal, and it is a sort of a similar dynamic now, where spot removal was extremely prominent, and there wasn't that many white decks because there's not that much Source of Plowshares right now. And
well, works similarly to what you were saying about core, the damage to the core nomads. It's every removal is bad edict, right? Like, that's great.
Exactly. And I'm playing 3 Mog War Marshals right now as well, so I have a lot of fodder.
Yeah.
So you get to just like create these situations where you have a bunch of 1/1s, and your opponent is staring at their Fatal Pushes, but you've got a Bombardiers that they have to kill, or a Runebolt Hordemaster, which is a Lord, or you've got a Sling Gang, and they really want to kill it, but they can't, because it's Fatal Push, it's Hydroblast, it's Go for the Throat, it's Fury. Goblin Churgeon's really nice against like Wraths, because it basically turns a Wrath into a half a Wrath. And then it still fulfills the function that... So normally I play 2 Skirk Prospectors, and I'm just playing 1 because Trojan is in the slot. It still fulfills the function of being a free sack outlet, which matters for a couple of things that the deck does, in terms of enabling Pashlik Mons, to kind of machine gun stuff. It's worse at that because you're not getting mana, but it's still an effect that you have. So I've been really impressed with Trojan, just against like you started out against Death and Taxes and random control decks, but even Death and Taxes, like, they're playing Bombardiers now. If you get to fizzle somebody's Bombardiers throwing at yours, then you're coming out ahead of the exchange. So like it still has utility in more and more matchups right now. And then the other guy is Siegekin Commander, who I haven't played in a long time. Yeah, we know and love him. And it's like, well, why would you ever play Siege Gang over a second Muxus or even like a Kiki Jiki? And I started out with the Siege Gang in my sideboard because I was like, against Reanimator, I'm boarding out Muxus because I'm boarding in 4 Red Blasts and then like 4 Graveyard Hate cards. My Goblin count is not good enough to support Muxus anymore, and it gets stuck in your hand all the time.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, so what's like a top end card that I can play that doesn't care about Goblin count? And I also really wanted it to be above 4 mana because 5 CMC dodges Fatal Push. And Siege Gang was what I came up with, and it's actually just been really overperforming in almost all the matchups because right now, as creature removal is so prevalent, getting the free value, the 3/1/1s matter a lot, even if the Siege Gang dies. Ground blocking is more relevant than it's been in a long time because of Barragoyf, because of Nethergoyf, because of all the Eldrazi, because of like Urza Saga constructs, though that part's not quite as much. But you get a lot of value out of random 1/1s right now, I find. So Siege Gang is really good for providing value, and then it's a really good way. I kept running these situations where I would lose close games in the long game because I would either flood out or I would be like ahead and then slowly lose a grip on the game. Usually, largely because of this flooding out. And Siege Gang is such a great late game mana sink, and it's really good at sort of locking the opponent out of the game, where it's not just like Muxus, oh, I flipped kind of mediocre, they have a removal spell, and now they kind of claw out of it. Siege Gang is it's like, I'm going to lock down your whole board. Like, I'm going to kill stuff that I normally wouldn't afford to spend a card on killing. So that's your Fable tokens. That's your, your third welder of the game that, like, I've run out of stuff to deal with. That's your Brazen Borrower that, I don't want to spend a card on. That's, all these sorts of things. So I find that comes up quite a lot. Is like having a card that has lockout potential. That's something that Goblins used to really be able to do. Oh, the other thing is like late game mana dorks that you have to care about, but you don't really want to. The traditional play patterns of Goblins, like back in the day, was that it was the ultimate late game deck because they were playing like 2 Siege Gang commanders. They had Goblin Sharpshooter. Once you got a certain amount of stuff onto the table, it was like impossible for an opponent. Yeah, it was just like, oh, I can't. No creature I play will not die immediately.
Yeah.
And I was really missing that sort of feeling of board control inevitability. And so I started out with my sideboard, and I was like, I'm just siding this in like every matchup. I'm just gonna figure out how to put it in my main.
Put it in, yeah.
And yeah, it's been pretty sweet, and it's funny to see. I always feel kind of funny, like whenever I go Lackey Siege Gang Commander, because it's like, okay, this could be a Muxus, but most of the time, I've been finding, it's rare. It's rare to lose after you Lackey Siege Gang still, even after all these years. It's still pretty good.
I fear that. Yeah, I'm not happy about a Siege Gang Commander on turn 2. That's the worst. Yeah, so we'll get a list from you, and we'll post that below as well. But you've got a couple other projects you're working on, so I wanted to highlight those as well.
Yeah. So people who know me more personally know that, and I guess I post on Twitter about it sometimes too. Is like I've gotten really into film over the past couple of years, and I guess I'll credit. I watched this documentary series with my dad, like I want to say like 5 years ago now, called "The Story of Film and Odyssey." I think the narrator is Mark Cousins, an Irish guy. And it goes through the entire history of film decade by decade from like the 1890s to like the 2010s. And it's got a very global perspective. It's very like, this director in the US did this technique for the first time in this film. And then that influenced this director in Japan who adapted it in this way. And then India, North Africa, Europe, like all these different directors all around the world influencing each other. And obviously not just directors, but like cinematography and just like technical prowess with the camera. And it really gave me, like, I always really liked movies, like, from a very young age, and like probably movies that I think my dad intentionally exposed me to, movies that, you don't, your average, 5-year-old isn't likely to see. Like, one of the first movies I ever saw was the 1938 Robin Hood, um, with Errol Flynn and Olivia de Havilland, and like I adored that movie. I still adore that movie. But like that was like that was peak children's entertainment for me.
Yeah,
it was a movie that was made like
Three Stooges for me, but I get you. Yeah.
Like way before me, kind of thing. And I really liked that, and I liked seeking out movies quite a lot. Like, I would always go to my local library and like pick through the DVDs and the VHSs as much as I could. But that documentary gave me the vocabulary to talk about and understand movies in like a more concrete way, because a lot of people don't always know how to talk about film.
Yeah.
Because it's just like they have like a sort of an emotional sense of like, oh, I liked it or I didn't like it, or it put me into a certain mood. But beyond that, they don't know how to articulate, the specifics.
You've learned to define chiaroscuro and what is it, kinesthesis or whatever.
Oh yeah. And so that documentary series, and then just like watching a lot of stuff, has given me a bit more of an insight into film. And so I've been talking to some of my friends, and they're like, "Oh, Eli, you're always recommending movies to us. You should start a podcast to talk about them." And so the show is going to be called Watch This, because the concept really is just I've got a bunch of friends who I'm going to have as guests, who I'm going to suggest watch a movie that they haven't seen before, based on what they're going to send me a list of their favorites, and I'm going to pick something for them.
Well, I for sure would love to be a guest on this at some point. This sounds like a really cool idea.
Yeah, so I didn't go to film school or anything, but I've tried to learn as much as I can about kind of the medium. I just I just recently went to my local theater, Glasgow Film Theater. It's a fantastic theater. Like, it's not it's not the fanciest place. They don't have the biggest screens, the comfiest seats, but their program is so good. They just like really have thoughtful people there who are really interested in film as a medium and like film culture. And like I just saw Seven Samurai there this past weekend, because they're doing like a action film overtime kind of thing, and Seven Samurai is like often called like the first action movie.
Yeah.
And seeing that on like the big screen was awesome. Absolutely. I love Kurosawa movies, so but it's also like they're doing like Police Story, which if you haven't seen is one of Jackie Chan's finest. They're doing I think they're doing like one of the silent like Buster Keaton stuff as well, like for like big stunt work. They're doing a lot of stuff with big stunt work. And I went there the other day, or a couple weeks ago. I saw like a documentary that Scorsese did about like American filmmaking that influenced him a lot. So that added a bunch of stuff from like the 20s and 30s to my watch list.
Oh yeah.
And I really enjoy kind of getting into it from like an artistic perspective. So this first episode that I'm working on right now, I just recorded with my friend Jesse. We watched Apocalypse Now, which is one of my favorites. And he had never seen it before, and he likes a lot of like. I asked him his favorites, and he had a lot of like kind of all-timers of their genre. So it was like Lord of the Rings, Princess Mononoke, Alien, Blade Runner, like great movies.
These are safe choices, yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, okay, I want to get something that is blurring the line a little bit on genre, and then is sort of stepping a little bit into the more kind of experimental side of filmmaking, where Apocalypse Now is not entirely linear narrative. It's kind of psychedelic. It's surreal. It's and there's also a lot of it's very thematically rich in that it is about the Vietnam War, but then it's also about Coppola's relationship with making the movie in the first place.
Yeah.
And so I really like that sort of like it's a great example of a movie that has very clear demarcations between like the text, the subtext, and then the meta text. And so we had a really good discussion about where those lines are drawn in the movie and how it kind of shifts back and forth. So working on that. Hope that'll come out soon. And then I think the next episode I think is going to be Lawrence of Arabia. Because I got my friend Catherine, who actually is the one who kind of pushed me into finally doing this idea. Because she had never heard of Lawrence of Arabia. And I was like, what? Come what? I was stunned. And I've seen it twice now, and I will happily watch it a third time.
Yeah. It's definitely one of those movies that, like, it's long. So, like, when you watch it, you're like, I took it in, and I've got to wait a while to see it again. You know, like, it's...
But I was really... Well, the first time I saw Lawrence of Arabia, I was really impressed with actually how well paced it was for, like, a 3.5 hour long movie. Like, it... For what it is, I think it actually is, like, pretty... You know...
Yeah, there's a lot going on. And it's also, like, it feels like you're learning something, but being entertained at the same time too, which is great about that.
I mean, I like a movie that after I watch it, I end up reading a lot of Wikipedia pages for the next hour.
I first watched Lawrence of Arabia when Hulu first came out, and it was just classic movies. I watched that, and then I watched Bridge Over the River Kwai because they were like both on it, and I was like, man, like I just like I guess this is like where I go to watch like AMC classics, like, you know. Like,
this is me learning about the British Empire.
Whoa.
Yeah, so I really, and then it's also great to watch great old movies, and then suddenly so many references are apparent.
Oh my god, like
you become like more culturally in tune. The whistling. There's so many shots in Lawrence of Arabia that have been like quoted by other filmmakers that you're like retroactively aware of. Like I loved Dune. Dune was awesome. I saw Dune at the IMAX, Dune Part 2. I thought it was like the best sci-fi epic they've made in maybe ever. Like I have really high opinions.
I'm partial to the Sci-Fi Channel adaptation myself.
We talked about this. We want to. I do want to see that. But you know, look, after having seen Lawrence of Arabia, I'm like, there's so much of Lawrence of Arabia deeply embedded in Dune.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Like not just narratively, but like there are specific shots that are directly pulled out of it. I also just recently watched The Fall, which was just it's a movie that had kind of distribution hell situation for streaming. Mubi finally re-released it like last Friday. It had been like on no streaming services for like I don't know how many years, but like over 10 years. I think it came out in 2006. And there's a sequence in there that is like a very explicit Lawrence of Arabia reference. And I think something that has really been imparted to me through like my education, because my dad's an artist and I'm by education ancient historian. So I teach. This past year I taught classics at the University of Glasgow as a teaching assistant, and so like my world is very much embedded in literature and art and history, and the biggest thing that I can say about that world is that context is literally everything. I've gone through so many art museums in my life, not understanding a single thing. But then if I go with my dad and he can explain, because he knows these movements, like, okay, so this piece is in discussion with this other piece that is part of this movement that, you know, and it explains, it imparts so much more meaning when you have the context.
The best way I can even fathom that, and I went to art school. I graduated with a photography degree, and I just didn't pay a whole ton of attention to it. But what you just explained there is like when I talk to my wife and I tell her that like this one song by this emo band is a response to this song by this emo band, and they're actually feuding, and like that,
Yeah.
like, and that's exactly the sort of thing that I think you're talking about. I mean, to a point.
Yeah. But that's like context. Everything just as it is in fine arts and in literature and history, like basically every subject I've ever studied, it's all about the context.
Yeah.
Archaeology, context is king. Absolutely. Like it's sort of a almost a cliche to say in archaeology that like 80% of or like 90% of the information of an object comes from what is the context of the object, not the object itself. So that sort of approach to film has really enriched the medium for me. And so I'm hoping that through the podcast, I can sort of expose more people to that and really just like get my friends some of that context as well. And it expands your horizons. It it helps you like things that you otherwise wouldn't know how to like.
Yeah. It sounds like a super fun project. And from what I understand, you have like all the landing zones and everything, websites and stuff like that ready. So we'll post that stuff below so that people can start following it and be ready for the first episode when it comes out.
Yeah. I'll be sure to send that stuff to you.
Awesome. Well, Eli, it's been, I mean, it's awesome. It's always awesome talking Goblins, but like, man, I'm so excited for this film project you're working on.
Thanks very much.
Yeah. This sounds like a blast. So anyhow, we're coming up on an hour, so I don't want to make this so long that like both of us are just sitting here all day gabbing about film, although I kind of would love that. But to that end, we got to have you on again after Eternal Weekend to talk about like, the fallout from Eternal Weekend and whatnot as well.
I should say I will be at Eternal Weekend Prague.
Sweet.
This will be my first Eternal Weekend. I'm going with a bunch of friends who kind of like we're all going as a group, so I'm really excited for that. I really like Prague's an awesome city.
Prague is apparently like a really great place for like because it's going to be around Christmas time. There's a ton of like cool Christmas stuff going on in Prague and stuff like that.
Yeah, so
I'm not a particularly religious guy, but man, I love the season. You know,
my brother lived in Prague for a number of years, and so I've been there a couple times, and Prague's just a great place.
I was this close to going this year, but I think it would make more sense for me to go to the all three next year. That's the plan. It's Phil and I are going to try and go to all three Eternal Weekends next year. That's the big lift for the podcast. We'll see if it happens, but we're on track. People are contributing to our Patreon stuff. We're getting there, so we'll see what happens.
Nice.
But with that said, man, again, it was an absolute blast having you on, and for me personally, it's been a long time coming. I know you've been on the show once before, but it's just
Thanks
a pleasure to have you.
Great.
Man. All right. Well, thank you everybody for watching. Hit all the buttons and all that stuff. We'll talk to you later on. Have a good one. Before you go, I need some help. Please subscribe to this channel and do your part to help sustain the legacy content ecosystem. Just subscribing to this channel goes a long way to reminding YouTube that people love and support this format. Now, if you really want to go the extra mile, you should think about supporting us through Patreon. Both the links for subscription and Patreon are right here. And if you're listening on an audio format, you can go to patreon.com/eternaldurdles. Thanks so much for watching.